Assalamu alaikum and a very good evening to you all. I'm Sadia Frin, currently working as a lecturer in the Department of English, East West University. First of all, I would like to welcome everybody to today's session. Uh, Seminar series is something that we have been regularly conducting in the department. And since this is our first seminar series of the summer semester 2020, I would like to cordially invite everyone to join the session. Today, we have among us the chairperson of the department, Dr. Farzana Akhtar, and we also have Dr. Fakrul Alum with us, who does not actually need any kind of introduction. And as our speaker, we have a very distinguished scholar, Dr. Khan Touseef Osman. Dr. Osman is now doing his second PhD in comparative literary and historical studies at the University of Salerno. He did his first PhD in the area of South Asian literature in English from the University of Kashmir. Later, he carried out his postdoctoral research in studies in historical trauma and transformation at Stellenbosch University. Dr. Usman is the recipient of several prestigious scholarships such as South Asian Foundation Scholarship for his first PhD, University of Salerno Scholarship for the second PhD, and Andrew Mellon Foundation for Postdoc. He has also published scholarly articles both at home and abroad and has given special lectures at a number of international academic events. Dr. Usman has taught at several universities, including Asian University for Women. Today, Dr. Usman will be presenting to us his paper titled The Struggle of Memory Against Forgetting, which is based on the post-memorial narrative of Kamila Shamsie's Salt and Saffron. Dr. Usman's talk will take approximately around 40 to 45 minutes. And in the meantime, if you have any kind of questions, any kind of queries or comment, you can leave it in the comment box and we will get back to you once the presentation is over. Now I request Dr. Usman to kindly start the session. Dr. Usman.
Thank you so much for that gracious introduction, Sadia. My paper today, first of all, it's an honor to be invited for presenting my paper by the Department of English, East West University. The paper that I'm going to present today is titled The Struggle of Memory Against Forgetting, Reading Kamila Shamsie's Salt and Saffron. This is a paper that I have been writing for the last for a very long time, 6-7 years. And very recently I have submitted it to a journal, and it has been accepted for that. This is a very long article of 9,000 words, but I'm going to present today to you around 3,500 words. So my arguments are going to sound a bit simplistic at times, but in order to have a better understanding or a very nuanced look at the paper, you have to read my article that is going to be published in the next issue of Crossings. Sadia, could you put the PowerPoint up, please? Yeah, the next slide, please. Yeah, so here you can see that I have got an epigraph here. The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. This is an iconic line by Milan Kundera from his book of Laughter and Forgetting. And that's where I got my title from. And the power I will be referring to is the power of meta-narratives, the grand stories, the totalizing narratives that drown or suppress the marginal voices. And I have organized my paper into 5 sections. Actually, if you look at the section titles, you will see that the first title is Not Quite Twins, Conceptual and Otherwise. This is a novel that is woven around many pairs of characters, pairs of ideas. So I will be dealing with these pairs in the first section. But the problem is, because of time constraints, I will not be able to explore all those pairs. I'll just explore one conceptual pair and one pair of characters. The next one is class meta-narratives and post-memories. In this section, I will be talking about familial meta-narratives, how these familial meta-narratives drown the voices and choices of people. And I will say that these meta-narratives are created or passed on through generations through post-memories. The third section is Alia's melancholy and mourning. Alia is our central character. So I say that the novel has a central struggle, and this struggle is it consists in a journey of Alia's movement from melancholy to mourning. The previous slide, please. uh, Sadia, yes. And the fourth section is partition, language, and silence. I will be talking about how the interpretation of language and silence can lead to mourning from melancholy. And in the final section, history of the partition and national melancholy, I will be talking about the silence around partition and how the post-partition nation states like India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, these nation states are sort of going through a kind of melancholy, and I will stress the need for mourning for these nation states. Could you please go to the next section? So first of all, I will be talking about what are the main objectives of my presentation today, and I'm reading out. So, this talk will explore Alia's being unconsciously defined by the past and her conscious effort at memory transformation as an ethical choice through mourning. It has two major foci. First, I will explore Alia's melancholy as a psychological state induced by class structures and demonstrate the capacity of agency in transcending her prejudices, which allows her to move on from melancholy to mourning. Secondly, by commenting on Alia's mourning through the interpretation of silences, I will point out the official silence around partition trauma by the states of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh that arguably binds these countries to melancholic loops of reenacting violence. Could you please go to the next slide? So here you have two diagrams, and I'm going to deal with this pair, melancholy and mourning. So this section is called Not Quite Twins, Conceptual and Otherwise. So if you look at these two diagrams, two figures, you will see that in the first figure, you are in the present and you have a past trauma. So you are going back to the past trauma over and over again, which means that you are performing your trauma repeatedly. That's melancholy, which means that you are a backward facing person. And if you look at the next figure in the bottom, you will see that this figure, I mean, this person also has uh, a trauma in the past, but through active engagement with the trauma, uh, a possibility of future opens up. So that person is a forward facing person. That is the difference between melancholy and mourning. Someone is backward facing and someone is forward facing. Let me read out now. Melancholy and mourning are very similar in their impacts on human beings. They both cause intense occupation with grief and have at their core a loss, quote, of a loved person or some abstraction such as one's country, liberty, an ideal, and so on, unquote. This is taken from Freud. The loss in the case of melancholy does not necessarily imply a death of the beloved, but it may very well be the loss of him or her as the quote unquote object of love. Sigmund Freud thus leaves the originary cause of both these states of mind open ended. However, what distinguishes melancholy from mourning is the absence of one trait in mourning, quote, an extraordinary diminution in self regard, an improvement of ego on a grand scale, unquote. Freud describes mourning as a conscious and normal exercise, while melancholy is an unconscious pathology. The objective of mourning is what Derrida so evocatively says, quote, to make sure that the dead will not come back. Unquote. They are somewhat symptomatically similar, yet critically different, like the not quite twins that plague the house of Dardidil through history. Dardidil house is a royal family, a fictional royal family, and this narrative of Salt and Saffron is woven around this fictional royal family. And this royal family goes farther back than the Mughal rule in India. And there is a curse on this royal family. The curse is that this royal family's life will be plagued by not quite twins. These twins are not identical, they have slight differences between them, and they diminish the name of the family. Could you please go to the next slide, Sadia? The next slide, please. Yes. Yeah, this is the one. So if you have a look at this diagram, you will see that there are three brothers who were born around the same midnight in 1920. So these brothers are triplets. They are not twins. That's why they are called the not quite twins. They bring disaster to the family because there is a misunderstanding between Akbar and Sulaiman. That's why this family gets fractured into two branches. And Akbar's granddaughter is Alia, and Taimur's daughter is Maryam. So, if you look at the relationship between Alia and Maryam, they should be the aunt and niece, but their name is starred in the family tree as not quite twins. So, how did that happen? That is one of the questions that we have. Now, let me read out again. Salt and Saffron is a tale of the fictional royal family of Dardidil, whose establishment in India dates even farther back than the Mughal rule. The immensely complicated family tree of Dardidils bear witness to many appearances of not quite twins through generations. This curse operates through a simple principle. There will be only one set of not quite twins at any moment of history who will bring disaster to the family and diminish its pride. Three brothers, Akbar, Taimur, and Sulaiman, are born around the same midnight in 1920. Taimur goes into self exile in an unknown place immediately after he turns 18 because of a misunderstanding. When he dies many years later, his daughter Mariam comes to live with Alia's family. It is also a misunderstanding that causes a fight between Akbar and Sulaiman in 1946, as a result of which the entire family gets ruptured into two branches, one staying back in India and the other migrating to what is to be Pakistan. At the time in which the story is set, there is a strange set of not quite twins, as they have not been given birth by the same mother. The narrator protagonist Alia's name is starred together with her aunt Mariam as not quite twins in the family tree. There are two ways she and her aunt may be twins. First, Mariam comes to live with Alia's family on the very day that Alia is born. So they see their familiar world for the first time on the same day. Secondly, Alia and Mariam could communicate almost telepathically, like sometimes twins are believed to be capable of doing. While in their house, Mariam falls in love with the family cook Masood, and they have to elope to get married as the extremely class conscious society of Pakistan will never allow such a union to happen. So that's how she diminishes the name of the family. Her elopement becomes a huge scandal in the high society of Karachi, since people's coming together across class boundaries is unthinkable there. This is how Mariam brings shame to the family by fulfilling the curse of not quite twins. Alia, as the other half of the twin, is supposed to further degrade the family. So, when she shows the least bit of interest in Khalil, this is a boy, Khalil, who comes from a poor part of Karachi, Alia's cousins become very concerned. It is not so much Mariam's elopement with Masood or Alia's interest in Khalil that causes the scandal or holds scandalous possibilities as the class prejudices that keep them apart. Within a particular society, only certain kinds of relationships are socially approved. The relationship between Mariam and Masood falls outside the range of socially approved relationships in a context that is acutely stratified on the basis of class. It is obvious, therefore, that the configuration of society is responsible for the scandal around their elopement. Could you please go to the next slide? The next section is called Class Metanarratives and Post-Memories. Whosoever is born in the family is brought up on the elaborate Dardedil lore and is expected to behave as their aristocratic lineage demands. Handed down from one generation to the next, the family stories undergo occasional alterations and modifications whenever expediency dictates, ultimately forming a familial metanarrative. This ensures a semblance of uniformity of conduct by the Dardidils who attempt to live up to the standards set by its predecessors. The rigidity of class boundaries necessitated and perpetuated by an aristocratic past makes Mariam's decision to marry the family cook so unacceptable. Even though having a royal lineage might have many enabling consequences, such as pride and dignity, it also determines the limit of knowledge, imagination, even language for its members. Contemplating, contemplating the limiting aspect of her memories as a member of the royal family, Alia concludes, quote, "Our lives are crippled by memories." These unquote. These crippling memories are passed on to the new generations of Dardidils from the old in a post-memorial way. Memories transmitted within family environments most often take the routes that Marianne Hirsch describes as post-memorial. Intergenerational transmission occurs, according to her, through the stories, photographs, paintings, and behaviors, etc., of the older survivor generation that post-trauma generations assimilate during their collective existence in a family or community. Even though these memories are not one's own, as they have not been acquired through experiencing, they are, quote, transmitted so deeply and effectively as to seem to constitute memories of their own right, unquote. This is from Marianne Hirsch. Likewise, Alia's, quote, troubled relationship with her parental past, unquote, Kuratul Ain Shirazi observes, is forced through postmemorial structures in the narrative of Salt and Saffron. Alia's connections with the past are made in the narrative through the acts of listening to others' stories, looking at and discussing photographs, paintings, and adopting behavioral traits of ancestors. Storytelling is of great significance in the collective existence of Dardidil family, as Alia says, quote, "Oh, they are a talking people, my relatives. And I have breathed in that chatter, storing it in my lungs. And yes, when need arises, I can exhale those words." Unquote. This clearly illustrates how stories sustain and perpetuate the connection between generations and why Alia has become a great storyteller herself. Most stories told to her by others are ones of traumatic events in the past, involving not quite twins. Like stories, photographs and paintings serve a similar purpose in memory formation in Salt and Saffron. It is through these processes that Shamsie explores the intergenerational transmission of memory and connects Alia with her past in the narrative. A past that is not quote unquote remembered in the traditional sense of the term, as Hirsch says, quote, post-memory's connection to the past is thus actually mediated not by recall, but by imaginative investment, projection, and creation, unquote. Alia's reconstruction of the past of Dardedil House in her quest for Mariam is an elaborate example of how such quote-unquote investment, projection, and creation. Her connection with the past, however, is not without a serious underside. The stories handed down through generations have trapped her in the rut of class prejudices, and she finds it exceedingly difficult, quote unquote, to be freed of remembered biases. These, of course, have grave consequences for her personality. The remembered biases in Dardidil royal house are sustained and perpetuated through the structures of post-memory, which is the reason behind Mariam's having to run away with Masood from the known social environment and ultimately Alia's deep sense of loss at her elopement. Alia's melancholy, which has Mariam's disappearance as at its core, by extension is also caused by class structures of contemporary Pakistan. The difficulty in moving from melancholy to mourning arises mainly because she struggles to transcend the class consciousness that her royal lineage has instilled in her. While melancholy is in itself a psychological state, in Alia's case it is made worse by the fact that her surroundings uphold the very reason for her loss as a norm. So her pathology is actually fed constantly by the society, in which case Alia ultimately has to use her agency at the risk of being a social outcast like Mariam to achieve some resolution of her loss through a conscious act of mourning by deconstructing the family history in an effort to find Mariam. Could you please go to the next slide, Sadia? The next slide is titled Alia's melancholy and mourning. As I said before, that this there is a central struggle in the narrative. The struggle is the journey from melancholy to mourning. So I will be talking about that right now. Alia and Mariam may be able to communicate telepathically, but their closeness cannot help Alia transcend the class biases so indelibly inculcated in her. So much so that she cannot imagine anything beyond the realm of possibility defined by her aristocratic lineage. The shock of Mariam's departure and the impending shock of discovering that she has just been as disgusted as the rest of the family, uh, rest of the family at Mariam's elopement with Masood horrify her. Alia remembers how she actually felt when she heard the news. Quote, I had felt something other than shock. When Abba told me she had eloped, I felt humiliation, also anger. Worse, I felt disgust. She's having sex with a servant. Those words exactly flashed through my mind. Unquote. Her affection for Mariam, however, her affection for Mariam, however strong it is, cannot accommodate Masood in the world she has been born into. It is for the same reason that Alia is reluctant about seriously considering a life with Khalil. Quote, I was born into a world that recoiled at such prospects. Unquote. Her disgust at the thought of Mariam's having sex with the servant Masood is caused by her deep seated class consciousness rooted in the society. Social stratification is also the reason for Mariam's having to flee from her surroundings with Masood. Alia's psychological state of melancholy, therefore, has a social origin that not only causes it but makes it difficult for her to wrench herself out of it as well. The process of mourning only begins when she endeavors to uh, find out about where Miriam came from and where she has left, thereby engaging actively with the past as an act of principled remembrance or ethical recalling. It is when the starched aunts propose a comfortable excuse at a family meeting for Mariam's questionable conduct by branding her an impostor who took advantage of Dardidil's. Alia starts searching for Mariam's whereabouts as an ethical choice between repressing the unpleasant past and reclaiming it. So this proposal was made by two very funny aunts. They are called the starched aunts. The starched aunts attempt to erase Mariam from the family history, or at least to push her to its fringes, is an instance of active act of memory making through which a familial meta-narrative will eventually be created, suppressing the reality of Mariam's existence. Alia registers how she feels when the excuse is proposed and comments on the formation of the dominant story. I could almost hear the scissors snipping away the strings which bound Mariam Appa to our lives. Here, now, the story was shaping, the one that would be repeated, passed down, seducing us all with its symmetry. In parentheses, the storytellers would add, there are still those who say she was really a Dardidil, but a new identity was fabricated for her by those who felt she blemished the family name. The motive behind constructing a revised story about Mariam is to prevent the reality of the event from destabilizing class consciousness of the family members. Alia's persistent love for her aunt enables her to go against the new family narrative, an act that will ultimately lead her to rise above class prejudices. In short, her struggle to remember Mariam has translated into a struggle against the power of class meta-narratives. Uh, it is her memory that enables her to be an active agent rather than a passive actor enacting the story. In the process, she finds a way of working through her past that leads to mourning from melancholy. A willful forgetting of Mariam, complying with the prescription of the new narrative, would push Alia further into the depths of her melancholy. Keeping memories alive is therefore a means of preserving agency and the capacity of mourning, at least for Alia. She is aware that her imaginative reconstruction, with which she puts up ethical resistance to meta-narrative, is no surrogate for real events that have led up to Mariam's elopement. Uh, However, this narrative is what ultimately helps her in working through her melancholy. It not only enables her to accept Mariam and Masood's marriage, but eats away the superstructure of class bias so that she can accept Khalil's hand, about whom she has been reluctant only because of his roots in the poor part of Karachi. The next slide, please. The next section is titled The Partition, Language, and Silence. Although Alia's loss and melancholy are not directly related to the partition of the subcontinent, the novel is deeply steeped in partition trauma. The entire Dardidil family is cut into two by the event of the partition, resulting in an eternal animosity across borders. Like Amitav Ghosh's shadow lines, yet in a different way, Salt and Saffron refuses to confine the partition to a few months around 14th and 15th August of 1947, but illustrates its transgenerational after effects in the present. The novel suggests that the partition is the severance of ties between siblings and family members. Many other partition novels also use the quote-unquote sibling rivalry trope to imply tensed relationship between India and Pakistan since their independence, as it is difficult, Shubir Kul points out, not to use this metaphor in the South Asian context. For example, both Anita Desai and Salman Rushdie dramatize enmity between a brother and a sister in Clear Light of Day and Midnight's Children, respectively. In Salt and Saffron, among the triplets born in 1920, Mariam's father Taimur disappears 9 years before the partition, while Akbar seeks a new future in Karachi at the prospect of Pakistan in 1946, and Sulaiman stays back in India. They are quote unquote handcuffed to history, to echo Salman Rushdie, by their lives and times in that crucial historical period of South Asia. It should be noted here that both severances have resulted from misunderstandings and miscommunications, which could be easily resolved if it were not for the pride and prejudices of the people concerned. I have argued in my article that Shamsie has addressed the theme of partition not only by representing sibling rivalry, but through her exploration of language and silence as well. Much of Salt and Saffron constitutes of the author's deliberation on the inadequacy of language and eloquence of silence. Language has been demonstrated as an inept medium for expression of complex feelings. Uh, Alia's self-conscious narrative contains many gaps that render it an unreliable account of the true events. She compares the drainage of meaning with the lack of salt in food, which, in each narration interrogates the very endeavor of representing facts in language. Set against the inadequacy and instability of language is the eloquence of silence. Mariam never utters a single word except while ordering Masood for food, a peculiarity that perplexes all who know her, and everyone has his or her own theory about it. No theory, however, is verifiable, and Mariam's silence generates interpretations ad infinitum even after her departure, as though the absence of words has inspired a clamor of interpretations. These interpretations of silence led to the introspection about established beliefs and accepted norms, and eventually helps Alia in the process of mourning. The only person for whom Mariam's silence never seems to be a problem is Alia, as she could communicate with her aunt without speaking. Alia owes the habit of translating silence into words to Mariam, who emits meaning, as it were, by unsaying things. Could you go to the next slide, please? So this section is titled History of the Partition and National Melancholy. Here I will be moving from Alia's silence to the silence of the nations of Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. The silence around the narrative of partition. Historiography in India and Pakistan around the partition took very different turns following their independence. The originary story in India is woven around the Nehruvian narrative of the long struggle against the colonial power for freedom of a nation that made a quote unquote tryst with destiny long ago. It stipulates a vision of secularism and accommodation of diverse people within one national entity. Pakistan, on the other hand, considers Islam as its unifying force and celebrates the birth of a new Muslim nation, but for which followers of Islamic faith would assume a minority status in the Hindu-dominated country in the post-British reality. Both meta-narratives are taught to school children and have formed their consciousness about the respective histories of their countries. The rupture of the subcontinent is generally attributed to the power-hungry Jinnah and his Muslim League in India, while the Hindu leadership and their supposed intention of communal domination over Muslims are held accountable in Pakistan. Even as these stories feature the tragic sacrifices people had to make for their independence, both of them have celebratory rings to them as well. They generally consider the enormous human sufferings of the partition as the sacrificial price they had to pay for independence. The celebration of independence combined with the narrative of sacrifices has drowned the cries and sufferings of the partition for far too long. This is similar to how the familial meta-narratives of Dardedil House overwhelms individual choices and voices. An uncanny silence reigned on both sides of the Radcliffe line about the lives and properties lost, people dislocated, bodies violated. History books treated the violence of the partition as a corollary of the independence, reducing stories of sufferings to brief descriptions and statistical data, so much so that it would not be untrue to say there had not been any history of the partition for a very long time. However, the voices drowned by the independence meta-narrative had eventually to come out to take stock of the freedom that generates so much popular jubilation. Next slide, please. The historiography on the partition, yes, this is the one. The historiography on the partition witnessed a decisive moment of shift in its focus during the anti-Sikh riots in 1984 in Delhi and elsewhere in the wake of the murder of Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi by her Sikh bodyguard. Survivors and witnesses of the mayhem against the Sikh population, one in which the state was thought to be indirectly complicit, realized that the communal violence against them is a repetition of what took place in 1947. This came as an epiphany to the oral historian Urvashi Butalia when a Sikh elderly said to her that it was like the partition all over again. Butalia observes the presentness of the past here. Quote, "It took 1984 to make me understand how ever present the partition was in our lives too, to recognize that it could not be easily put away inside the covers of history books." Unquote. The oral narratives she collected were compiled in her seminal work entitled The Other Side of Silence: Voices from the Partition of India. A similar work of oral historiography was done by Ritu Menon and Kamla Basin, titled Borders and Boundaries: Women in India's Partition. Both works, the latter to a greater degree, are notable for their emphasis on the gender dimension of partition violence. The efforts of Butalia and others to salvage history through oral historiography was complemented by subaltern historiography, which brought the stories of real people suffering in their everyday life around the time of partition to the foreground, something very opposite of what meta-narratives do, or the nationalist meta-narratives do. Instead of grand political events, it focused more, for instance, on the story of the pregnant woman who had a miscarriage on the road before strangers' eyes in broad daylight while migrating on foot from Lahore to India, or the father who slaughtered his daughter to save her quote unquote purity from the imminent gang rape from men of other religions. In addition, the renewed enthusiasm in literary representation of partition, both in regional languages and English, resulted in many instances of scholarly re-evaluation of the partition in several research areas, treating literary works as quote unquote fictive testimonies or quote unquote testimonial fictions. The cumulative achievement of all these researches is that they questioned the official meta-narrative of independence and successfully cast doubt on their seemingly inviolable premises. Could you please go to the next slide? Yeah, this is the one. The partition has become a trope or a motif in the subcontinental history that cannot be left behind in the past. Instead, the communal violence witnessed in 1947 resurfaces at the socio-political level every so often with the slightest nudge to the so-called religious feelings, as exemplified by the anti-Sikh riots in 1984, Gujarat pogrom in 2002, and the acts of lynching that have become so very common today in India. Similar events have been reported from Pakistan and Bangladesh as well. Indeed, the most significant repetition of geopolitical fracture seen for the first time in 1947 was 1971, when the east wing of Pakistan got separated in the process of bloody independence of Bangladesh. The recent events of persecution of minorities, hardening of identities along religious lines across South Asia, and the ongoing crisis of Kashmir reminds us of the quote unquote unfinished nature of the partition. Despite oral and subaltern historiography or fictive witnessing of the partition, the absolute absence of official memorialization may have resulted in the repeated acting out of religious violence in post-partition times, which may be countered in an ethical and cultural act of mourning. The total unwillingness of commemoration by the states of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh keeps the past wounds alive, festering them in the present, and holding possibilities for future traumas in the forms of ethnic and religious hostility. Uh, as a moral obligation, therefore, South Asian states must engage with their traumatic memories that have been repressed for more than 70 years. The refusal or avoidance has been unsuccessful in laying the ghosts of past to rest, who have so often come back to haunt the region with resurgence of violence. If Salt and Saffron has any contribution to the act of mourning partition trauma, it is the underscoring of the importance of listening to silences along with all the other kinds of historical narratives. Alia represents a modern post-partition nation-state with a complex mix of modern ideas and deep-seated prejudices, just as her mourning involves an active engagement with the past through the interpretation of silences as much as words. The nations of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh need to work through their partition melancholy and break the cycle of violence by being uh, attentive to the silences of history that official meta-narratives have caused. In other words, uh, an elegy of history has to be constructed with sustained analysis of articulated and unexpressed memories instead of being trapped in the perennial lament that South Asian history has become. Thank you so much. That was my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Osman, for such an insightful and interesting session. Like I mentioned before, we'll be taking the question and answers. But before that, I would like to request Dr. Fukrul Alam to say a few words regarding today's session. Dr. Fukrul Alam.
Lot to say actually, but I'll try to uh, restrain myself. I thought that was an excellent presentation, Touseef. It really stimulated me, and despite the hyper real world in which we are doing this, uh, it is something that has been uh, preoccupying me lately. I've been working also on partition. Uh, as you said, as you perhaps did not use the word, but you meant everything that the word implies. Partition has been occluded, especially in Bangladesh, more than the other two countries. And so, someone whose consciousness has been formed by 1905, 1947, and 1971. It's so important for us to come across partition narratives and engage with them. What you said, your central point is so good. Mourning is something that we need to do. It's an active thing. And in engaging with the ghosts of the past, this is where we move forward. This is the way to move forward. If not, we'll have the repetition of the riots and all the tensions and misunderstandings that go on. Excellent from the point of view, from one point of view, excellent from the use of theory. I was very impressed with the way you use theory, Derrida, Freud, Derrida, trauma theory, and all of these things come together here. I mean, the choice of the book was very interesting. And if I can put it from my point of view, as a Bangladeshi of that generation, which was in the 20s, I was 21 in 71, 20, I was 20 in 71. I've avoided Pakistani books. Pakistani books have always been something, like everything with Pakistan. I go to the store, if it's a Pakistani thing, I don't want it. There's a kind of a trauma that is associated with it. So I haven't read Kamila, Shamsie, but the moment you started talking, I immediately remembered Midnight Children. Because of Beans. I also remembered Gunter Grass, the Twin Drum, because I think there's a kind of intertextuality that is extremely important here. I read Clear Light of Day, but I think I've forgotten it, so I can't remember it now. But it's this play, and because the last novel I finished day before yesterday was Khwabnama, I was thinking of Khwabnama as part of this, part of an attempt to remember the partition and to reactivate our memories so that we can think about partition. So, as you can see, I go on, and maybe I will talk to Touseef later on. You stimulated me immensely because you made me think about things that are important. What I would like to point out to those listening, my colleagues, my junior colleagues listening here, is how much you can pick up from someone like Touseef. How he has picked up things which are in the air, so to speak, intellectually, and how you can work your papers so that you can bring them. And what he's done is he's woven them together so well in 45 minutes. So this is something what I would like to really take from this presentation I'd like to thank Farzana, Sadia, Ishrat for bringing it together, and those of you who are listening. Is our value, the value for us at this point in time. Touseef's presentation should stimulate all my junior colleagues, and if there are students listening who are serious, into working similarly. Work with our text, well, our text in English, work with texts like Khwabnama, Paki, and bring them together really as something that allows you to keep your perspective on it. So thank you very much. I'll sell more later, perhaps. Not in
Thank you,
this
sir.
side. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Fakrul sir. Indeed, it was a really very interesting session. And Dr. Osman, I would really like to thank you for presenting such an interesting session. Now, I think we can move on to the question answer session. We have quite a few comments, and also we can see a question. It said Rakibul Hassan. He has asked a question. He has said that it would be easily resolved, within quotes, it would be easily resolved, dot, 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 the pride and prejudices of the people concerned, uh, inverted comma close. Could you please explain what do you mean by that, Dr.
Okay.
Usman?
So I think he's talking about a particular sentence that I have written. Uh, I have tried to say in that, that sentence that the misunderstandings between people could be easily resolved if it were not for the pride and prejudice of people. So people are proud. People don't want to compromise with each other. They don't want to, address the misunderstanding and miscommunication with each other. So the ego plays a role. That's because of the ego and because of the pride and prejudice of these miscommunications and misunderstandings don't get resolved very easily. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Osman. I hope Rakibul Hassan, you have got your answer. Okay, we'll look at more questions. I don't think there are many questions, and actually, there are a lot of comments where people have mentioned that excellent work, excellent talk, congratulations. All this, people are actually, I think, really excited, and they actually found it really interesting. That's why many comments like these. And your session, I felt, was really comprehensible. In that sense, I don't think people actually have that kind of questions to ask. And since we do not have a lot of questions right now, and I think we are done with the question answer session, we are done with the presentation and discussion. So I think we can finally end the session. But before that, I would like to mention my colleague Isra Jahan for helping out, for organizing the entire thing. And thank you very much, Isra Jahan, for coordinating the seminar series session. It wouldn't be really possible without you. I would also like to thank my colleague Rifat bin Reza for helping us every now and then. And finally, I would like to request our chairperson, Dr. Farzana Akhtar, to say a few words and finally end the session. Dr. Farzana Akhtar.
Thank you, Sadia. Thank you for giving me the floor. I first would like to thank Dr. Touseef for agreeing to be with us and presenting your paper. And it was really, as Fakul sir has said, it was really a very interesting and intriguing paper. I personally was interested in memory, melancholy, and nostalgia. So your paper gave me a lot of ideas to work on in future. And about the paper, I don't think I could say more than what Fakrul sir has already said. Whatever Fakrul sir said is truly in every words, and it's always inspiring and stimulating to hear such brilliant works. And for us, it is an honor to have you with us. And with this, I would like to also thank, as I have said before, Sadia, Ishrat, the organizers, for arranging such a wonderful webinar. I know you people worked tirelessly and have set multiple times to make sure that everything works properly. And I know that you people sat, even we four of us sat like half an hour before the program started to make sure that everything was working properly. And I also like to give a big thanks to Rifat bin Reza, who helped the organizers a lot. Thank you, Rifat, for giving technical training to the organizers. We could not have pulled off this webinar without your help. And lastly, I would like to thank our very own Shantanu Chanda, who is always there. Whenever any sort of program happens, we need a poster, we need a designer. Shantanu is always there beside us to help us. So I really appreciate your generosity, Shantanu, and I really thank you for your hard work. And finally, I would like to thank the audience as well for being with us and for inspiring us, for praising the paper, and be with us always so that we can continue doing more seminars. And if we do not get to meet face to face, we can arrange more webinars so that we can keep nurturing the intellectual ideas of our colleagues. With this, I would like to end and hand over to Sadia.
Thank you, Farzana Apu. Thank you very much for your kind words. Before I end the session, I think we have another question from the same person. So he actually, on the basis of what explanation you gave, Dr. Osman, he has commented saying, "Isn't it a bit simplistic to think like this?" What would you say about this, Dr. Osman?
Yeah. So at the very beginning of my talk, I have said that I can come across as a bit simplistic today because I mean, the entire paper is of like 9,000 words, and I presented just 3,500 words. So in some places, I had to simplify my arguments. That's why it can come across as a bit simplistic, but a I mean, a nuanced understanding of this could be possible if the person who's asked that question, who if that person could read my article that is going to be published in Crossing in the next issue.
Okay, so we have, I think, another question from Shahnaz Amir, who is a colleague actually. So she has said, from the reading of the novel, it can be interpreted that the non-so-quiet twins often took different paths in their lives. Taimur becomes a valid, and then Mariam transgresses her boundaries to elope with a servant. Similarly, Mariam is presented as a silent one, while also Alia, who is portrayed as a twin who has taken the gift of storytelling from her grandmother. Alia is more rooted in class consciousness. When it comes to dating Khalil, she steps back upon finding his ties. Okay, so is this a question, or I think she is actually
So
uh,
it's just
a
just
comment. She's just giving a
kind
comment
of
on that. Okay,
observation. So
observation. Yes,
very
Shahnaz, thank
happy.
you very much. Yes,
No,
yes, Doctor.
I'm just very happy that the person who has made that comment has actually read that novel. Other than that, she couldn't have made that comment. So it's a very interesting comment. Thank you so much for that.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Usman. And okay. Okay, we have comments. It was a pleasure. It was really interesting. So these kinds of
Yes,
comments,
yes,
it was Dr. Usman, really thank you very much for making this seminar session so interesting.
thank
Okay, I think we can end the session today. I would like to thank everybody who has been listening to us. I would like to once again thank Dr. Fakhrul Alam, Dr. Farzan Akhtar, Dr. Osman, and everybody who was present here today. Hope we'll be conducting seminars like this in the future, and hope we'll get to meet everybody online. Thank you, everybody.
I hope Sadia is next.
So,
I hope to.
Sadia,
Yes.
thank you for conducting this session so very smoothly. Thank you
Thank you,
so much.
Dr. Osman. It was really a great pleasure having you among us.
আমরা কি আছি অনলাইন?
জি স্যার,
Yes,
এখনো
sir.
আছে বোধহয়।
আছি।
অন্যদের